Welcome back to the EntreLeadership Podcast. Real business people who actually do things. This is not theory. If you want a professor in a college who's never made payroll, you need a different podcast. We're people who leave the cave, kill something, and drag it home. And in that light, I got my friend Vic Keller joining us, serial entrepreneur, speaker, and business coach. Vic, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dave. How are you, sir?
Doing great. He has launched over 10 companies, 18 companies you own currently in various sectors. Launched 10 that were, some of them were acquired by Berkshire Hathaway. Hathaway, part of the transaction, he was working with Mr. Buffett. I want to learn more about that as we go. And he's on several boards, and I've run into him a couple of different places, and I had just enjoyed getting to know him. I thought you guys would as well. Thanks again for joining us. So you started your first business, a landscaping business, back in 2002, and then that leads you into just launch after launch after launch. How does that work? I mean, why can't you just stick with one thing?
Well, I think maybe I have entrepreneurial ADD. It's a good question. So I think the landscaping business started because I had a lawnmower and a couple hands, and I was ready to just go do something. Didn't have a lot of money to invest and wanted some free cash flow. So started that company and had a ton of fun, and then found my way. I was a young man there, and found my way into McDonald's and Burger King, and Dave got my driver's license and ended up delivering pizza for Domino's and had a ton of fun. But I think I figured out starting a company wasn't too hard. You just had to, I went online and formed an LLC and hired a couple of my best friends to join me and kind of sold them the dream. And there I went and started my first business and really my last business, not a whole lot differently than each other. But I've always been drawn to freedom and being creative, and I've not been a good rule follower. And so being an entrepreneur was a place that I always felt safe. I did spend a little time at JP Morgan when I got out of college, and loved banking, loved everything I learned at JP Morgan, but I knew that I was on the wrong side of the table. I wasn't going to be a good banker. I needed to go be an entrepreneur.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so I am enthralled with this Warren Buffett connection, and he's a guy that obviously many of us have admired from afar, not only his wit and wisdom, but obviously his business acumen. And but some of his one-liners, the annual meetings and the annual reports are just chocked full of fabulous Warren Buffett-isms. But what's it like to hang out with him?
Well, I have to say, I was part of a unique scenario where several of the companies that I acquired, that I started, were acquired by Mr. Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, and I did get to spend some time with him. He's got hundreds of CEOs and a lot of companies, and he's got a pretty full plate. But I would say that a lot of the lessons I learned from Mr. Buffett really came from in 1994. I read a book called The Warren Buffett Way, and there were a lot of things that I learned in that book. And you kind of are able to trust those things, but when you get Mr. Buffett as a business partner, now you get to verify him. And I learned a lot from him. The thing that was most fascinating, Dave, is that his vision is really driven by his knowledge. Whether you're in the inside or the outside, one of the things that you learn about Mr. Buffett is he loves to read, he loves to study, and a lot of people are driven by passion and kind of blind passion. And passion is amazing energy, but it's really not what it takes to be successful in business. It's knowledge. So, I always just think back to what is the most fascinating trait that I've learned about him and from him and seen him do. And he's a guy that is all about being educated and learning and transitioning that into really what is vision and passion. So that was a big part of it. Early in my career, I think I started a few companies pretty blindly with a bunch of adrenaline and passion. I wish I knew a little bit more, but definitely learned a lot about what the value is of studying and reading. So Warren spends, from what I understand, 7-8 hours a day reading, and we all don't have the luxury to do that. But it's very clear that he makes good decisions because he's a knowledgeable guy.
But he's not reading just anything. I mean, a lot of times he's actually learning about the company that he's running or is about to acquire, how they do what they do, understanding it. He doesn't go in blindly just looking at the accounting sheets or just looking at the financials. He actually wants to understand the business and the essence of it. Is that right?
100%, and he doesn't stop. So I mean, he's reading about the business and learning about the essence of the business, as you said, in the industry, and what's really the tailwinds and the trade winds of the industry and what's going on. And then once he's in the business, it was pretty fascinating to see how quickly he becomes very educated about an industry or a space. But he's a consummate student, definitely a curious intellect. But that was the most fascinating. And then Mr. Buffett, as he says publicly every time he talks, is the management team is ultimately what he's buying in these business. He's buying good people that know how to run businesses, and he seems to trust in them the most. But he's definitely up to speed on the details of what's going on. It's quite fascinating.
So all these different companies that you have started and run, what was the average size number of team members?
Yeah, a typical one I would say was, several $100 million in revenue, and definitely companies that had all the way from 10 employees up to hundreds of employees. At the end of my formal career in the automotive industry, where I spent a lot of time, I had several thousand people under my leadership and several $1 billion under my leadership as well. So some of them were small, some of them were large. I'll tell you, the most fun that I've ever had in business has been really the smaller businesses, the ones where it started out with 2 and grew to 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 people, and really able to recognize how much revenue the company generated in comparison to how many employees we had. That was a number that we always celebrated, of keeping the team lean and small, but trying to grow the top line number.
Absolutely, and keeping that ratio there. Yeah, so when you're looking for and finding in a small business, that's all of our viewers, just about our listeners on this, what are you looking for when you're hiring these team members and retaining them? How are you going about the collecting of the thoroughbreds?
Well, you bring up a good point, right? I mean, so it's a lot better to have thoroughbreds than mules or donkeys, and so we focus on that. I think the biggest transformation when it comes to people that I've had in my career really happened probably 15 years ago, and I moved from the concept of a job description to more of a journey description, and I really thought about bringing talent on the teams the same way that I thought about probably courting my wife when I was a young man, and that is really thinking about what is the journey that you want these people to go on with you, what is the journey that they want to have. So instead of it being what's the task, what's the job, what's the immediate accomplishment that needs to happen in the business, really what's the journey for their life? What do they want to accomplish? What do they want to do? And by the way, sometimes there's not good alignment with the business task and the business objective, and it's just not a good fit, and we move on. But I think most of the success around getting high capacity, high quality talent has been understanding how you could retain those people for a long time by understanding what their own goals and journeys are. And by the way, when people don't know what the heck they want to do, and they don't have goals, and they don't really have a plan and a strategy, a lot of times those aren't people that are a good fit for our team, and we have to wait for people that really know what they want to do, because it's important for us to have that characteristic in the business.
So when you talk about a strong company culture is achieved through balance of aligning good people, clear vision, and strategy. One of the things I've noticed, and I'm trying to teach these guys this in the EntreLeadership world as they move up through the stages of business, from a treadmill operator where you're by yourself on the treadmill, then you start to add team, and then you start to lay out strategy and try to align people with it. It becomes like the leader's almost full-time job to say, this is who we are, this is where the culture, this is where we are going, the strategy or vision, and if you want to be a we, this is how you align. And then give them the option of opting out. If they're not smart enough to figure out that they need to opt out, we have to help them opt out. Or they're just too, stuck or something. You're not aligned with where we're going and who we are. And I love that you put that in that, use that phraseology on this. But I think sometimes, and you've experienced a lot because you've done a bunch of different deals. But to get these, get the ducks lined up, so to speak. All of us are ducks in that sense. But to get us lined up, there's some heartache involved, because people that you love, some of them don't want to get on the train.
That's right. That's right. It's, one of my very best friends in the world was one of my first employees, and it was really painful, but I figured out he just was not a cultural fit, didn't have the right alignment for where we needed to go. And I had to walk in his office one day and high five him, and he moved on. But, I think the best way to align culture with really vision is through professional development and training. And I remember early on in my career, I'd bring people in my office and I would sit them down and lecture them and maybe raise my voice and get frustrated. But I figured out that if I was able to gain cultural alignment in the company, it was primarily through training and development. So I'd sit down with these people. I moved from it was a policy, it was a memo, it was something we needed to do, to let's create a training program around what our objectives are. And then it becomes required. I mean, you're almost certifying people to follow the rules instead of giving them a directive. You're getting them on board. So, and I'll tell you, the bigger the company's got with more people, I think I was a control freak early in my career, and I just wanted to tell everyone what to do. And as I got older, I figured out that I could sell people on what to do if it truly was professional development and training. And I wanted their input and I wanted their feedback. Hey, sometimes, I was making bad decisions and I needed people to be able to tell me. And it was a lot easier to understand where I needed to make adjustments as a leader if we were doing development and training versus just giving people directives. No one wants a directive.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking with Vic Keller, serial entrepreneur, speaker, business coach. You can learn more about him at his website at vickeller.com and check him out at Vic Keller on all the socials and pick it up there. So I read in your bio that you build businesses without using debt, which, of course, is one of the reasons you and I connected up in the process, because we bumped into each other at an event, and you said, "Hey, man, I do your stuff, and I don't borrow money," and and that's how we became friends, was in that process. So talk about that, because I'm pretty much considered a freak, as you know, for not using debt, and yet the truth is a lot of people go debt-free in their business operations.
Yeah. So, look, I like to dance, Dave. And in debt, I feel like you're having to dance in a straitjacket. You really can't be creative. You can't do all the fun things that you want to do. I'm involved in some businesses definitely that have debt. And I'm, a participant in those businesses, but businesses that I own outright, that are ones that, I'm really focused on, don't have debt, and it allows you to be more creative. There are so many days that I'm, frustrated with limitations around growth and opportunity, that would potentially advance if there was debt. But the reality is it would restrict us, and we wouldn't be able to be as creative, and we wouldn't be able to ultimately have as much fun. So I think patience is a big part of the process. But for me, when I started my first business, I didn't have any credit. I didn't have any money. I really didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have any wealthy family members. I was just trying to get by and ultimately provide for my family. And so I figured out the best way to generate capital was to go out and sell. And fortunately, I love to sell. And so anytime I needed funding, that just told me I had to sell more. And maybe one other piece of that, I've always enjoyed businesses that are high margin. And I know that you talk.
And debt destroys the margin. Yeah.
Yeah, debt destroys the margin. And I love to protect the margin because I like the free cash flow, because I like to be able to reinvest in the business. And you can't reinvest in the business with just effort. You need capital to reinvest in the business so you can scale and grow. So it's been a fundamental practice for me. I think I started out, Dave, out of necessity. I mean, I just didn't have anywhere to go borrow money. And so you learn how to build businesses without borrowing money. And it's a pretty fun thing. And, at the end of the day, when you sell a company and you don't have any debt or you don't have much debt, it makes for a lot bigger payday. And that's a lot of fun.
That's true. It changes the whole liquidity moment, doesn't it? For sure.
It does.
Hey, Vic, thanks for hanging out with us, man. Vic Keller, serial entrepreneur, and you can find him at vickeller.com. Appreciate your friendship, my friend.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you.
This is the EntreLeadership Podcast.